Well, there's a lot I could talk about today. We've got Fed speakers, which are always relevant right now. I don't think I want to get into that. I've beaten the issue of the Fed to death. You know, we're on a bit of a depending on how you look at it, a short covering rally. That's what I'm going to call it for now. But I don't want to talk about stocks or finance today. We've also got Azovstal finally getting cleared out. The Azov battalion has surrendered, and along with the regular Ukrainian troops that were there. This was always inevitable. Mariupol fell weeks ago, yet these guys just were stubborn and wanted to wait in Azovstal and use up all their food until they finally had to surrender. They were never going to break out of there and beat the Russians or something. There was a lot of weird attempts at rescuing, a few individuals, where the Ukrainians lost a bunch of helicopters, so we still don't know what that was all about. There's rumors about a Canadian general or something like that, but I don't want to get too much into that because I've seen no confirmation. But then I remembered that today is there are quite a few primaries going on today, but specifically the Pennsylvania gubernatorial and senatorial primaries, which I have been quite interested in, although I haven't talked about them on the channel, not even once. And I don't do a ton of overtly political stories. I normally am talking about things that are a little more behind the news. Things like, Ukraine war, Somalia war, Fed speak. But I do enjoy, actually analyzing elections and things from time to time. I am not, some genius wizard, but I do like, from time to time on this channel, to go ahead and, try and analyze the situation, maybe make some predictions. And this PA election is interesting on a number of levels. I would say the biggest story is the battle between TV doctor Mehmet Oz and Kathy Barnette. Kathy Barnette is someone who was pretty much unknown 2 weeks ago, as far as I could tell, and has suddenly rocketed nearly to the top spot. She's had a lot of momentum. But every poll that I've seen, right at the end of this, the last polls of this election still all show her behind. There's not a single poll that shows her ahead. Now, does that mean that she's going to lose? History teaches us no. Polls, especially the election day polls, have often been quite wrong. There have been plenty of examples in recent American history in which someone who was not leading in any of the final polls ends up pulling it off. The 2018 election of the now very popular Governor Ron DeSantis, for example, all the polls around election time showed that he was going to lose. And so I, back then, still naive, still someone who had some faith in polls. I understood the polls were not a panacea, but I thought that they were somewhat predictive. I looked at it and I said, wow, the poll numbers seem pretty convincing. They're all kind of in one direction, and they all seem to show that Ronnie D is not going to pull it off. And then, lo and behold, he did. And the rest is history. So I don't want to write off Kathy Barnette, especially when she's had so much momentum, and she now appears to be in a statistical tie with the good doctor. Of course, it's hard to call it a statistical tie when you have multiple polls that are very close, but all show Oz, a 1.5 to 2 points ahead. But with that said, the numbers that I've been seeing is that the late deciders have been breaking more towards Barnette than Oz. And there's quite a few people in this race, so neither of them really are getting over 30%. But in my experience watching elections for, I guess, closely since 2010-ish, I think it was the first time that I really paid attention to elections and polling and primaries and all those things. And I've paid close attention to every, midterm and presidential election cycle that we've had in this country ever since. So I've got, I'm a young guy, but as far as paying attention, I've paid attention to quite a few elections. And the final number tends to be a little more lopsided than the polls would imagine. When the polls show a pretty close race, usually the victor is going to be the victory is going to be a little more lopsided. So I'd imagine that whether it's Barnette or Oz who pulls it off, I wouldn't be shocked to see the winner at around like 32%. Because pollsters a lot of times will miss certain groups of people who are going to vote, but aren't expected to vote. And so unless you nail a good sample of the actual electorate who is going to participate in the election, you're not going to get a 100% accurate poll. You know, because the way that people answer polls, they're going to have, their vote is going to be less, they take it less seriously when they're participating in a poll. So somebody who knows that someone is behind, let's say they're supporting the guy in third place, David McCormick. David McCormick, as I've talked about before, I think I did 2 videos on this Pennsylvania Senate race, and both of them were talking about how terrible David McCormick is and why you shouldn't vote for David McCormick. And all I needed to know about him was that he's the former CEO of Bridgewater. That's enough. I don't need to know anything else about him. If you got to that point to where you were able to become the CEO of Bridgewater, you're a bad person. Plain and simple. And if you weren't a bad person when you got the job, you were a bad person by the time you left. Unless you left in disgrace for doing something good. Because it's just impossible. It's not that I hate rich people. It's that certain people in certain positions attain their wealth through illicit means. And a company like Bridgewater and people associated with it, they are those people. And so this guy couldn't be anything but a corrupt nightmare. Nevertheless, he is polling in third place at something like 22%. Anyone who is looking at this election, considering who to vote for, let's say they support McCormick in the polls, they know he is not going to win. It's not close. He's a distant third behind the top 2, Oz and Barnette. And so the McCormick supporters who might back McCormick in a poll, a certain percentage of them are going to think twice today when they go to actually vote for real, because they know their guy's not going to win. And so they're instinctively, voters don't like to feel like they're throwing away their vote. It's a special kind of person who can vote, for the guy in third or for a third party in a general election and know that their guy has no chance of winning. It takes a certain level of conviction. Most people want to be on the side of a winner. And even if they don't care about being on the winning side, if they just feel really strongly, their disdain for one of the top 2 candidates might be enough for them to decline voting for the guy in third, to vote for the lesser of the 2 evils at the top. And so this is what's going to contribute to either Oz or Barnette getting over 30%, in my opinion. I think that the McCormick supporters who are, and I don't want to slander people, but generally speaking, the kind of Republicans who would support someone like David McCormick if they know much about him, are, gosh, it's a hard choice, because you've got Barnette, who is more of a firebrand, but Oz is endorsed by Trump, and the people who would vote for somebody like McCormick really just don't like Trump. McCormick is a Romneyite. That's who he is. If you're voting for David McCormick, you're voting for Mitt Romney. Now, maybe some people don't know that. I guess I should take that into account. Because I look at it and I say, well, gee, if you're voting for McCormick, you really aren't going to like either of those 2, but for different reasons. You're not going to like Oz because, 1, he's a TV doctor, and 2, he's endorsed by Trump. And then Barnette, you're not going to like because Barnette acts like someone who would be endorsed by Trump. So it's kind of like they're both too Trumpy. But then again, David McCormick is not running to be an anti-Trump guy. He's trying to portray himself as, this pro-Trump businessman. And so maybe some of the people who naively have fallen into that would be, I think those are going to be the ones who he sloughs off in the actual election and who end up going to either Oz or Barnette. I was looking, I couldn't find, but I was hoping that there was second choice, that there was like a second choice question in some of these polls. I would want to know who's the second choice of McCormick's voters. Because if the people who are supporting McCormick know that he has no chance of winning, you got to look at who their second choice is, and that is probably going to be, well, it's not necessarily going to be the deciding vote, but along with late breakers, that's your second group you got to watch. And the same is going to be true, for all of the people who support, the small single-digit candidates. A lot of them are probably going to, in the actual election, say, you know what, I want my vote to count. I'm going to try and influence and vote for one of the top two candidates. So, most of you probably don't care what I think, but, if I were in this situation, I would definitely go for Barnette, not a hard choice. Do I know much about her? Nope. But I know enough about McCormick to definitely say no. I mean, I would just not vote if McCormick was the candidate. Almost would rather have a Democrat because, at least then later on you could run maybe a good Republican against a Democrat and try and win against them in 6 years. McCormick, what are you going to do? Try and primary him? They can't even primary Lindsey Graham out in South Carolina or any of these other terrible Republicans. So you don't need more terrible Republican senators. I mean, hell, look at Mitt Romney. He'll be there for the rest of his life if he wants to in Utah. So that guy's a definite no. Then there was Dr. Oz, and I remember, if I remember correctly, when I talked about this race before, I said, well, if it's between Oz and McCormick, Oz, I don't think he's going to be great, but he's got to be better than McCormick. That was pretty much what I said, and I stand by that. At least we've averted the worst-case scenario by it being Oz or Barnette. But Barnette at least seems to have a chance of being a good senator. Oz probably won't be good, but I guess potentially could be. He might grow into the role, but at least going in, there's not much reason to hope. He's just, he's still Dr. Oz. If he had asked me 2 years ago, hey, would you vote for Dr. Oz? I would have said no. Like the idea, like elected office and Dr. Oz, the ideas do not go together in my brain. Now, could you have said the same thing about Trump? Well, yeah, but Trump at least tried for a couple of years before he ran to portray himself as someone on the Republican side, and he tried to ingratiate himself with the base, and he didn't listen himself, but he had people who listened to like Rush Limbaugh and Alex Jones and read Breitbart and try and figure out, hey, what's the GOP base thinking? And then he tried to channel that. I don't think Dr. Oz has done any of that. I think Dr. Oz is just, for whatever reason, maybe he's bored doing his show, or maybe he genuinely feels like, I'm smart, I'm well known, I'm pretty, I can do this. I want to serve my country. I want to be one of those big guys, making important decisions. Any of that can be true, and doesn't necessarily mean he's going to serve any interests that I favor. It means he's going to go up there, and then he's going to get sucked into the blob, and, just become another pawn of Mitch McConnell. He's not somebody like a J.D. Vance who has thought through things in life and has decided, you know what, I'm really successful, I've got a lot of money, but I've got an ideology, I've got my way of thinking that things should be in this country, and I'm going to go try and advance those ideas. J.D. Vance could turn out to be a fraud, but at least as of now, he's acting like he's going to go up there to actually try and stand for something, because he has already made his money, kind of a similar idea with Trump. Trump didn't go to the White House and get rich off of it, at least as far as I know. Oz, is he doing this for a grift? Maybe, maybe not, but even if he wasn't doing it for a grift, that doesn't mean that what he's going to do is necessarily good, because he has to have good ideas to begin with. He can't just run on, boilerplate, hey, I'm a Republican, and I'm Trump's personal friend, so he had to endorse me. And, I do think that he is a bit of a killjoy for, PA Republicans, because he does have that carpetbagger thing in him. I guess he is from Philly, so it's not like he's a total carpetbagger, but, his house was in New Jersey when he started this, because, he films a TV show, presumably in New York City. And so, yeah, he lives in Jersey, not in the Philly area. Or who knows, it might even be Philly area, but on the Jersey side. But I would imagine he probably lives closer to New York. And then here he is trying to run for elected office. I mean, he's pretty damn, put it this way, Dr. Oz is a long way from Western Pennsylvania. He's a whole world apart. But somebody like Barnette channels the energy of those people well. And Western Pennsylvania, turning that is what made it possible for Republicans, or for Trump, and now Republicans in the future are going to have to follow his lead, to win in that state. You have to energize those folks out in the West and in the center of the state. And you have to appeal to regular people. I just don't think Dr. Oz does that. He's, I mean, God bless him. He's just not, he doesn't have that common man appeal. I guess he's got a TV doctor, Oprah's All-Stars kind of appeal. And so, maybe if he was running in Jersey or New York, he'd probably be fine. I'd say, hey, it's Jersey, it's New York, they're deep blue states. Sure, you're probably not going to get, a great Republican running in a state like that. But, it's always good in a place that big with that big of a population. You should run somebody. They should be somewhat serious in trying to win. And hey, if Dr. Oz gets in, oh well. That's, they're probably better than Kirsten Gillibrand or, what's his name? Bob Menendez. But in Pennsylvania, the way that it's moving, you would expect that that state can produce a decent senator. And whoever gets in is very likely going to be there for decades to come. I mean, the Senate, you've got 6-year terms. You win re-election once, you're there for 12 years. And, Oz isn't a young guy, but he's not very old either. And so, at that stage, once a senator's in, it's pretty much, if it's a swing state, hey, they'll lose re-election or they die in office. You don't really have the opportunity to primary them. I mean, it happens occasionally, but not really with the Senate. People get primaried in Congress occasionally. It does not happen very much. I mean, AOC was able to do it. Before that, really, 2010, with the Republicans, that was the last time that you really saw a lot of incumbents getting primaried successfully. But I mean, I think about where I live, Florida, and how many times Charlie Crist has won. Out of times he's won primaries, I should say. I mean, I feel bad. I mean, he lost one, and that was in 2010, and that was against old Marco Rubio. Again, 2010, the only time that incumbents really were losing in primaries. And while that was a Senate primary, and Charlie Crist was, the incumbent governor, not the incumbent senator, he was, leaving the governor's mansion, trying to run for Senate, because I believe he was termed out at that point. Actually, he might have only been elected once before at that stage. Yeah, I think he was, because I believe he came in after 2006, Charlie Crist. So he was running for Senate, lost that primary. But ever since then, even though he switched parties, he has won every primary that he's been in. Even though he's not an incumbent in that office, he's kind of an incumbent because he is somebody who's been elected before, and he's got that name recognition. And people respect that for whatever reason. Even though he switched parties, they still voted for him in the primary. And this is the way things typically go across America. People vote for the name they recognize. And once somebody's been in office, you would say, well, they already recognize Dr. Oz, though. Yeah, but they don't recognize him as a politician, as a leader. Yeah, they recognize his name as a TV doctor. That doesn't necessarily mean that they automatically assume, oh, yeah, that guy's who's supposed to be the senator. No, but once he has been in there for 6 years as a senator, people are going to think of Dr. Oz as a senator, not as a TV doctor. Just like people think now, Ronald Reagan, what do they think? They think of a president, not an actor. That's why I remember when I was a kid, and I would watch Back to the Future, it was one of my favorite movies. Actually, it was probably my favorite movie as a kid. I don't know, I like Terminator a lot, too. Terminator 2 was just fantastic. But anyway, I remember watching Back to the Future. And Doc says to Marty in the 1950s, when Marty goes back, oh, okay, future boy, who's president of the United States in 1985? And Marty, of course, says, Ronald Reagan, because he was. And Doc retorts, oh, Ronald Reagan, the actor? And that was always the joke back then with Reagan. But nowadays, I, growing up, is someone who was born what, 10 years after Reagan left office. Of course I think Ronald Reagan is a president. What? He was an actor? I had no idea. So it'll be the same effect with Oz. 6 years from now, no chance on seating Oz in a primary. Again, they couldn't get rid of Lindsey Graham. They couldn't get rid of John McCain. John McCain, of all people. The worst Republican, potentially, who's ever lived. And now that he's dead, Lindsey Graham probably first. Oh, look at Mitch McConnell. Couldn't beat Mitch McConnell in a primary. Not in 2014. I think old Matt Bevin came a little close. Ultimately lost. Matt Bevin then was able to go on and win a governor's race for one term. Lost re-election to a Democrat. But, Kentucky's a weird state like that. You do, places, in the South, you do still occasionally get a Southern Democrat to win. Hell, look at, what's his name? Is it John Bell Edwards in Louisiana? But anyway, Mitch McConnell, a human salamander, liked by no one, still wins his primary every 6 years. And the same thing applies, to Democrat politicians. Although I guess I already cited Charlie Crist, so he's a Democrat politician. He's going to win his primary easily. So with that said, when you have an open seat, it is immensely important who you choose. And I just have to say, it's such a shame that old Trump had to go for Dr. Oz. Because, here's the thing. It'd be one thing if I knew that Trump was the kind of person who actually, valued his endorsement in a way that, he talked to these guys and made sure that they were really solid before giving them his endorsement. That's not how Trump makes decisions. He endorses people based on whether or not he thinks they're going to win, not how they think. So sometimes Trump picks people who I agree, hey, they're going to be a good candidate, like J.D. Vance. Other times, Trump picks people who are dog shit. And then other times he picks people who I'm kind of ambiguous about, like Dr. Oz. And that's because it's not that Trump's judgment is just bad. It's that he's judging them based on a different set of criteria. He really doesn't care what they think. He doesn't care what they believe. As long as they, say, hey, Mr. President, I think you're swell. And I wouldn't vote to impeach you. Beyond that, he just looks at, hey, can this person win? Will they win? I want to make sure I pick the winner. And that's what he does, and that's why he's so useless as a leader of a political movement. It's just such a shame that you can't have somebody, who is as effective at Trump at the political game to, broaden things out beside themselves. It's too bad that you can't have somebody who is as, effective at communicating as Trump, who also can read a book. But hey, this is, if you could have a perfect candidate, democracy wouldn't be so bad, now would it? I mean, who am I out here pining for good candidates when I'm the guy who says, hey, you never get a perfect candidate, that's why democracy is shit. So this Barnette woman, is she perfect? Probably not. There's probably things, if I got to know her, that I would hate about her. But she seems to be the best bet. So if you're in Pennsylvania, I'm sure you've already voted by the time you're hearing this. And if not, you probably have 15 minutes left. So go vote for Barnette if you can. Now, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow because I didn't even talk about the governor's race. I guess I'll talk about that tomorrow.